Okay, this is another episode of Quackaholics Anonymous, and I didn't get to do one of these last week, but there is something that I actually happened to figure out that should have been glaringly obvious to me, but sometimes in situations you don't see what's glaringly obvious because you're too busy kind of walking all over the situation versus really taking a step back from time to time. It reminds me of a particular painting I saw one time, and I don't know exactly how the trick works, but when you're too close to the painting, it looks kind of like a blurry mess. But when you step back from it a few steps, or you step back a little bit and you look a certain way or two, a picture kind of forms out of it. It would take a very clever artist to create something like that. But uh, diving into this, as I've said before, I've made several videos on here arguing about the inconsistency that AA does when it says you can make the group your higher power or anything you want your higher power, and how that doesn't really fit into the AA model because the AA dictates what God wants, what God thinks, what God wants you to do, how God wants you to behave, and it seems to be this bizarre, twisted, puritanical type of higher power that demands you bow and worship it. Well, it just takes away your drinking problem for a day or two as long as you follow these weirdo, bizarro rules and inventory and tell your secrets to strangers and all these other things without evidence that any of this does anything for a drinking problem. But the obvious connection that should have came to me is that is only used, and I brought it up on here before, kind of. I've said that AA tries to manipulate it both ways, and they actually do. They'll say you can believe anything you want when it suits them, as I've said on here many times. And they tell you exactly what God thinks and what God wants and how you're supposed to obey God and all those other kind of things when it suits them as well. They have two standard definitions of God. One that, depending on what's convenient and depending on how they're depending on how they're defending the cult itself. But the program actually hints at the fact that you can believe in this spirit of the universe, or you can believe in whatever entity you want to call an entity, as long as you believe in an entity, which, without any evidence of an entity, I see no good reason to do that. But that's only as a starting point. It talks about, if you can just admit that there's a power greater than yourself, which is vague, flowery language that doesn't tell us much of anything, other than the fact that it's a sly manipulating tactic to get you to agree to his stupid program. Aren't you just willing to admit there's something out there greater than you? Which, no, I'm actually not willing to admit that there's some bizarre, ill-defined, immaterial thing out there that's greater than me. If you want to say something like, well, the court systems are greater than you, like I've seen AA members do, or a volcano or a tornado or any of those things are greater than you. Are they not greater than you? Then you're doing a whole lot of word manipulation uh, to try to broaden the definition when it's very obvious what we're talking about here. I mean, uh, nobody's ever asked me to believe in a fucking tornado because I can see one, I can prove one, and I can also show you that a tornado doesn't have fuck all to do with quitting an addiction problem or anything else. But they use this type of language, it's almost like an entrapment because they say that if you can do that one thing, then you're well on your way. It doesn't say where you're well on your way to because you're stuck in a program that you can never graduate from, and you're stuck in a system that you can never get out of, and you're diseased forever. And the only thing you can look forward to is day after day, week after week, month after month, year after miserable year, but sitting in those rooms and saying the same old shit over and over again. Doesn't sound very attractive to me, and even worse, there's no evidence to prove that this does anything for people's drinking problems. But if you dive into the AA 12 and 12, he's very explicit about saying that that's only what you're supposed to do in the beginning. That if you're stubborn about this whole entire thing, then you're to blame. As always, Bill W. blames everybody else for not swallowing his bizarre, superstitious nonsense, mumbo jumbo, double talk. But that's only to begin with. It's something they kind of use to ensnare and entrap you with. It's a sly way of undercutting their real intentions. See, they start out by saying, well, if you could just believe there's something out there greater than you. Well, if you can't define what something out there is, then I don't understand what it is I'm supposed to even fucking believe in, right? You got to define what it is you're talking about. There is words that matter in the context of communication, and it's one thing that really annoys me about AA, the way they try to redefine every word to anything and everything. I've heard him say something like, well, I mean, you believe that, the state is a power greater than yourself in the legal system and everything. Yeah, but we're not talking about an immaterial thing that you can pray to, right? You're literally trying to get me to believe in something immaterial that I'm supposed to be on my knees praying to, which does not include the state system. It does not include an organization, an entity, or a rock or anything else that you're trying to wiggle your way out of being, of giving me a clear-cut definition here. It's mumbo-jumbo and it's double talk, and it's a dishonest way of engaging things. I mean, you can't come out and just tell the truth when you're trying to recruit somebody into the cult religion, because if you told the truth, it would sound absolutely ridiculous. So you have to resort to this dishonest way of interlocuting, or did I say that correctly? Well, you get the idea. It's a dishonest way to discuss. Maybe, can't you just believe there may be something? There may be something. You're well on your way if there is something. But that's all that's for, is to get you started, is to gradually get you sucked in, like the Venus flytrap, where the fly gets stuck at the bottom of it, where it's a slippery surface going down. It's not meant to be the foundation of what you're supposed to do to be an obedient cult member for the rest of your life in the Quackaholic Anonymous program. As a matter of fact, I decided to pull out something from their 12 and 12, and believe it or not, before I dive into this, I've seen old-timers even say, well, the 12 and 12, that's just Bill W.'s opinion. You mean the Big Book isn't? If the Big Book was inspired by God, what did God do? Did he get bored when Bill W. wrote the 12 and 12? When he was hunched over on his typewriter crying, about to have a nervous breakdown, and people were disgusted with him during that time period. I guess God was bored, decided not to speak to him anymore, But he needed to write this book, and this book is considered canon, and it's read in AA meetings, and people go to it in AA meetings. So unless you want to say as an AA guru that you're going to make a break from your program and you're going to throw out some of the conference-approved literature, which in essence would be you saying better than God in the AA program, and the loving God that expresses itself in your group conscious, better than it. And you don't want to do that. That might be pride and ego, right, AA guru? But anyway, step 11. It mentions this, and this is the only reason I pulled this up for this quick video, that I didn't know if I was going to get a chance to make this week or not. Prayer and meditation are our principal means of conscious contact with God. Now, how do you know that, Bill? How do you know that you have a primary way to have a conscious contact with God? Because you're claiming to do something that circumnavigates most of the traditional religious and spiritual routes. Spiritual is a nonsense word, and I don't like to use it. But you're claiming to know something that a majority doesn't know. A majority of people doesn't know, because you're claiming to know more than the religious layman here. You have a program where everybody gets to talk to God, really have a direct line of communication. There's only two things that could be happening in a situation like this. Either you're dishonest or you're fucking delusional. I tend to think you're just dishonest. And I'm going to kind of notice something here in the creepy, slimy way that he tries to do this in his writing here. In step 11 in the 12 and 12, he says, we AAs are active folk. Really? Active doing what? Sitting in meetings, complaining and talking for the rest of your lives and looking down on new people? That's all I ever saw it being done. Enjoying the satisfactions of dealing with the realities of life. Really? When do they deal with the realities of life? I never saw any AA people tackling life head on. I never saw AA people saying, you know what, had a drinking problem, I'm going to dust myself off, I'm going to stand up, and I'm just going to move on with my life. That's how I'm going to handle this thing. I'm going to do this. Oh, wait a minute, you can't do that in AA. In AA, the way the cult dictates, you're hopelessly broken forever, and you have to rely on AA. You have to bow and scrape to AA all the days of your life, so you're not dealing with the harsh realities of life. Isn't it amazing how this guy can't even write a fucking sentence without fucking it all up? Usually for the first time in our lives, and strenuously trying to help the next alcoholic who comes along. Well, you don't get to speak for everybody else, Bill. You're going to say for the first time in our lives, we're facing the reality of everything. Like nobody who ever came to AA, or nobody who ever had a drinking problem, ever had to deal with reality before. Like nobody ever had to deal with anything before they got to AA. Everybody just, what did they do before they got to AA? Well, they tried to live life according to him on self-will, which, by the way, that's the only will there is your own will. There's no mystical, immaterial creature in the universe that's propelling you to do the things you're doing in AA, unless you can demonstrate that for me, and nobody's ever been able to demonstrate that's possible, so I don't have any reason to believe you here. But but he's going to do this slimy, underhanded tactic and say, this is the first time in your life you've ever tried to face reality. If it weren't for me and my AA cult religion, folks, you'd just be helplessly lost. Unlike us chosen by God people here. I mean, it's underhanded, but that's what he's doing. He's telling you that for the very first time in your life, you probably have never had to do this before. Like all of us don't do this shit every day. So it isn't surprising that we often tend to slight serious meditation, and prayer as something not really necessary. When does this happen? Because what you've done here, Bill, is you've created a scenario that I am unaware of that exists, and you're going after that scenario as though you're invalidating or saying something profound. You know, you're trying to shift the burden of proof here. What you're trying to do is say, some of you don't do the prayer and the meditation, and it shows. But you don't have any evidence of this, do you? Or are you just speaking for everybody else like you're wont to do in your shitty literature here? You know, I'm already going to attack your position before you can say anything. You probably don't think prayer and meditation is necessary. Probably most of you don't, but people like us who face reality, well, we know. Condescending fucking junk. Anyway, to be sure, we feel it's something that might help us to meet an occasional emergency. What emergencies? In AA, I can't tell you how many people in AA would say they had a life crisis going on, and they'd go to their meeting before they would deal with the life crisis. There was a particularly heartbreaking story I heard that didn't surprise me in the least bit, and I bet everybody watching this who's been in AA for any period of time and recognizes it as the harmful fucking cult that it is, knows exactly a story similar to the one I'm about to tell. It was a story of a lady who was crying because she had been in a serious health situation, a serious emergency, and she was forced to terminate her pregnancy. Not due to an emergency, like maybe it was an ectopic pregnancy, maybe, there are situations where that is necessary. And really, if you're like me and you believe people should have bodily autonomy, you don't really have to justify why you have to do these kinds of things. But she had to have an abortion. She had to terminate a pregnancy. And she reached out to her mother, who was an AA person, and the AA person said, I'll talk to you after I go to my meeting. I got to go to my meeting first. Can't worry about my own daughter. Can't worry about my flesh and blood, who's going through a very traumatizing experience. I got to get to a meeting first. I knew certain people that would cruelly brush off real responsibilities and real life people in their lives, like their family members, their kids, or their wives, or whatever, so they could run to an AA meeting. And you know what they do when they get to the AA meeting? They tell the emergency situation that's going on so they can get sympathy and they can get attention and they can make the whole entire fucking tragedy all about themselves. Chime in on the comments, by the way, at the end and let me know if you know anybody who's done something like that. Anyway, many of us are apt to regard prayer and meditation as somewhat mysterious skill of clergymen from which we may hope to get second-hand benefit. I don't know of anybody who's regarding it like that outside of deeply religious people who you claim can't get sober because they don't have the true path to God. I've seen so many people in AA bash other religions in favor of the AA program, so I don't know what you're talking about again. But this is what Bill is doing. He's painting a picture of something that doesn't exist, and he's going after that thing as though he's saying something profound or teaching something that nobody's actually made an argument for at this point. Or perhaps we didn't believe in any of these things at all. To certain newcomers, and to those one-time agnostics who still cling to the AA group as their higher power, I got to read that again. Think about this. To certain newcomers and to those one-time agnostics who still cling to the AA group as their higher power, meaning if you're clinging to the AA group as your higher power, you're doing it all wrong. It's right here. You can't make the group your higher power, but for a short period of time. And if you don't move past that, then you're like what Bill W. is saying here. You're just one of those people who just cling to the group as a higher power. And why is it you can't do that? Claims for the power of prayer made, despite all logic and experience and proof of it, there is no logic, experience, or proof in prayer. The Templeton Foundation has been trying for years to prove that prayer works, and you know what? They haven't been able to do it. And neither has scores of other people who were praying in the middle of atrocities all throughout history proven that there was any logic or experience in prayer whatsoever. And beside that, if you think there's logic or experience in prayer, and you think there's proof of prayer, Bill, now's your time to present the evidence for it so I can evaluate that. You are going to let me evaluate it, right? Let's see. Those of us who once felt this way can certainly understand and sympathize. So you're not going to provide any evidence to this. You're just going to make an assertion that there's logic and experience and all of this that you have, and but you're not going to give me any evidence to believe you. You're just going to assert that this is the way it is, and we're just supposed to accept it because you assert it. We well remember how something deep inside us kept rebelling against the idea of bowing before any god. First of all, I thought this was a disease. I thought this was a disease that made you, it was an allergy. It was it was physically and bodily different from your fellows. And now you're saying I'm rebelling at the idea of bowing before God. Well, please show me why that's necessary. Please show me there's a God out there that wants me to bow before it. And please let me know how you speak for it. Because any entity that refuses to cure people of their drinking problems but has the ability to cure people of their drinking problems and is just sitting idly by waiting for you to bow and scrape enough isn't something I want to worship. So again, here you go with bullshit. We well remember how something deep inside of us kept rebelling against the idea of bowing before any god. No, maybe there was something deep inside of us that said, you know what? This bullshit they're teaching us in AA, it doesn't compute with me. It doesn't resonate with me, and it doesn't seem really rational or reasonable. But Bill is not going to allow for that. He's not going to allow for anybody to have any kind of literal, or I should say logical, since he used that word, objections to what he's talking about. He's just going to paint everybody with a wide sweeping brush and just say, you just don't want to bow before any god. So much for having any god as your higher power. So much as using the group for your higher power. You're one of those silly people who keep clinging to the group as your higher power, even though you told them they could do that. And it goes on to say, let's see, I dropped my paper here, but I printed. Many of us had strong logic, too. I don't think Bill W. knows what logic is. Logic is a thing kind of like mathematics. That would be like saying, I have a strong math equation, which proved there was no God whatsoever. I'm unaware of anybody who's making a claim that there's no God whatsoever. I'm not making a claim there's no God whatsoever. I'm not making the statement that there is no God whatsoever because that is a claim. It's a claim that requires evidence. Just like you, Bill W., are claiming to speak for God here, and that is a claim that requires evidence, which you're not providing any. You're just telling us what we got to do here. You're not winning us over through reason. You're demeaning logic. Is it because you don't understand how logic works? Is that it? What about all the accidents, sickness, cruelty, and injustice in the world? Well, yeah, what about those? I mean, that is a legitimate question, is it not? You're going to answer it, right? What about all those unhappy lives, which were the direct result of unfortunate birth and uncontrollable circumstances? Surely there could be no justice in the scheme of things, and therefore no God at all. Okay, so now you're going to prove why that's wrong, right? Sometimes we took a slightly different tack. You're going to put out this thing that is only one of many arguments, and then you're just going to move on to the next thing. You're not going to actually address this. You're not going to alleviate our concerns about this. You're not going to actually say anything about the people who are saying, what about all the injustices in the world? You're just not going to answer. You're not even going to do the Dodge get out of jail free card that a lot of people do and say mysterious ways here or anything like that. You're just going to paint this picture, and then you're just going to move on. By the way, that's only one small part of denying or not accepting a belief. You do understand that, right? It's not just about cruelty. It's not just about injustice. It's not just about sickness or accidents or people with unfortunate birth circumstances. Those are all legitimate concerns. But that's only one part of it. That's a bad reason to not believe. Believe it or not. I'm doing a pun on words there. No, that would be a bad excuse not to believe. To say, well, there's too much shit in the world, so I don't believe. That's not really what I would call a good foundational logical reason to not accept a claim. The logical reason to not accept a claim is because there is no evidence, right? I might look to all the accidents. I might look to all the atrocities. I might look towards examples like death camps and gulags and malaria and the Black Plague and many, many, many other unfortunate events that have happened throughout history, and the many unfortunate events that are happening right now. 20,000 people starve to death every day. Did you know that? 20,000 people die of starvation every day. I think it was 20,000 the last time I checked the numbers. Those are legitimate things to bring up to say, well, if something's all knowing, all loving, and all Cameron, sure doesn't seem to care very much. You could bring up Epicurus and the problem of evil here, but that's still not necessarily a good foundation to say there's nothing there. The reason to say that there's nothing, well, saying there's nothing there is a claim. Let me retract that. You would say that you don't accept this premise because you don't see good reason to. You don't see any evidence for. I'm not making a claim by saying I'm not convinced. That's not a claim. That's saying I'm not convinced. Can you convince me, Bill? It doesn't look like he's intending on doing that. So, sometimes we took a slightly different tack. Sure, we said to ourselves, the hen probably did come before the egg. It wasn't a hen. If you want to really get serious here and you want to get scientific, whatever evolved into a hen came first. And I'm not going to go down the science rabbit hole with that one because it would bore everybody to death. And something tells me he doesn't understand it anyway. No doubt the universe had a first cause of some sort. You don't have any evidence for that. You don't have any evidence of anything that may or may not have taken place before Planck time and time began. So you're claiming something as knowledge that you don't have any proof for. You're just saying, no doubt. There's no doubt it had first cause. Can you demonstrate that you know there was a first cause and what the first cause was? By the way, how do you know the first cause wasn't something else, like another universe destroying or collapsing on itself, which birthed this one into existence? How do you know what the first cause is? You're just throwing this out there like everybody has to accept this. There's no doubt there was a first cause. Oh, really? I have doubts there was a first cause. Can you convince me there was? The God of the atom may be hot and cold by turns. This is the kind of thing people say when they have no fucking understanding of science whatsoever, no understanding of logic whatsoever, no understanding of reality whatsoever, and they try to throw around these horseshit word salad terms like they understand what they're talking about. An atom is an atom. To my knowledge, it doesn't require a deity. Hot and cold? Does he really think hot and cold existed in the expansion of the universe before Earth was here, or before we were able to feel it, or before we developed it? Oh my God. No pun intended when I just uttered that. But certainly there wasn't any evidence of a God who knew or cared about human beings. And you're going to provide me with evidence of one, right? One that specifically fits your definition and your model. The one that cares about whether or not you drink or not. The one that cares who you have sex with. The one that's worried about how you have sex. The one that's also worried about whether you stole a candy bar when you were a kid in school and that's why you drink a fifth of vodka a day. You're going to show me some evidence of this, right? We liked AA, all right. Who? And we're quick to say that it had done miracles. No, I've not ever said that AA has done miracles. I've never seen anything miraculous about AA. You do realize that an event that happens on a regular, consistent basis, like people quitting drugs and quitting drinking and things like that, if it's such a common occurrence as it is, and since states of spontaneous remission are pretty high, where people pretty much do it all the time, where people mature out of it, where there were cases like those guys who were in Vietnam who abused drugs in Vietnam and who come back home and they stopped abusing drugs pretty much because the culture they were in, the environment they were in, being under the strain of war all the time was removed and their circumstances changed and they stopped doing it. That's not really a miracle. There's actually evidence for how that happened. There's actually good, solid, foundational evidence for why that could have happened. And evidence can always be challenged. It can be debated. It can be argued about. It can be shown, tested, observed, all those other things. There's no evidence for any of the shit he's saying. There's no evidence that he's not doing nothing but pulling this out of thin air. But we recoil from meditation and prayer as obstinately as a scientist who refused to perform a certain experiment lest it prove his pet theory wrong. Please point me out a scientist who refused to perform an experiment lest it prove his pet theory wrong. You do know the head scientist in is it the Human Genome Project or something like that? Something to do with DNA and genetics. He's a Christian. And he said he had to kind of put aside some of his more dogmatic leanings when he enters and puts the lab coat on in the morning because, yeah, because it doesn't necessarily line up with what he believes. I can't remember his name right now, but I do remember him talking about why he believed, and I thought those were terrible reasons, but that's beside the point. He's just created something that he has no evidence for. There's a scientist out there who won't do an experiment because he's afraid. No, pretty much no. Pretty much what he's talking about here is not taking place. What has happened is we've gone from understanding that people are not demonically possessed, but they have things like epilepsy and schizophrenia and things like that. What's happened here is in the long history of mankind, as far back as we can possibly record and know, there's never been any evidence of a supernatural explanation for any of this. So, once again, he doesn't know anything. He made that up probably on the fly. Of course, we finally did experiment, and when unexpected results followed, we felt different. In fact, we knew different, and so we were sold on meditation and prayer. You do realize feeling different and thinking you know different is not evidence of truth, right? Since when is thinking and feeling evidence of whether something is true or not? Think of any ridiculous position that you can imagine. Think of the most ridiculous flat earth weirdo idea that you could think of. I won't create one for you. I'll let you decide that for yourself. Tell me that you couldn't accept that position based on, well, I just feel it's true, you know? I just feel it's true. I stepped outside, the ground was flat. When I was driving my car, it didn't go up in the air, so it's flat out there. I just know it. I feel it in my heart. That's not evidence. And that's not evidence of anything. That's just a feeling. The very group that'll tell you feelings are not facts, the very group that'll tell you got a broken thinker, the very group that tells you your intuition is completely wrong and warped by insanity. But now he's telling you that he's somehow proven something because he knew it and he felt it. Those of us who have come to make regular use of prayer would no more do without it than we would refuse air, food, or sunshine, and for the same reason. Now, there's tangible results about what happens if you don't have food. There's tangible results about what happens, like vitamin D deficiencies, if you don't have sunshine. There's tangible results about what would happen to you if you didn't have any air. You wouldn't be living very long, you know. So no, you can't take something that's immaterial without any proof whatsoever that you have created off the fly and say that it's essential to your living. Not unless you can demonstrate that in some kind of way. Can you demonstrate that something terrible happens to you when you don't do this shit? And when we turn away from meditation and prayer, we likewise deprive our minds, our emotions, our intuitions of vitally needed support. You don't have vitally needed support for what? How do you know it's not just a delusion? How do you know it's not just the voices in your head telling you to do this? How do you really know that you can trust what you're saying here? How do you know that you're not making this all up? How do you know you're not projecting your own desires onto it? How do you know aliens from another planet aren't beaming a death ray into your brain and making you believe these things when they're not true? Please demonstrate how you know this. How do you make this determination? I heard Matt Dillahunty use an example kind of like this. I didn't want to use it and not give him credit for it, but if I deal you a royal flush with a deck of cards, you pick up the deck of cards and it's a royal flush. Did I cheat? And if you say yes, you could say no, it's not a trick question. Did I cheat? If I took out a deck of cards and I shuffled them and I dealt them out to you and you pick up a royal flush, did I cheat when I did that? And if you think I did, or if you think I didn't, what evidence do you have outside of a feeling to make that determination? And how well would you trust that determination? Because it would be possible I could deal you a royal flush. It would also be possible I knew a magician's trick and dealt it to you that way. But how would you make the determination? And more importantly, how would you convince everybody else around how you know for a fact that that's what I did, whether I cheated or not? It's the same thing here with this shit. How do you know that these feelings that you're claiming to have as a result of doing all this shit is not just that, feelings that you're claiming to have? And besides that, you say alcoholics are delusional. So how do you know you're not experiencing more delusion? The actual experience of meditation and prayer across the centuries is, of course, immense. No, it's not immense. The actual experience is just a bunch of people doing it. There's no evidence that it's done anything. It didn't stop the Black Plague. It didn't stop the concentration camps. It didn't stop the gulags. It didn't stop Jim Jones's people from all dying. It did nothing for the Heaven's Gate cult. It didn't do anything for Sinan. By the way, Sinan, I can't talk tonight. The Sinan cult was started by an AA old-timer, by the way. It was an AA old-timer who believed this thing called the game, where he did confrontation therapy, like I've talked about, that's used in treatment. And in the confrontation therapy, it was literally what you see and what you hear and what you do in that confrontation therapy, it stays there. Now, he decided he spoke for the divine, and he did all kinds of crazy, bizarre, and out-of-this-world things, and decided to declare war on the media and the end of time. He ended up dying out of neglected health and a whole lot of other things. But there's no evidence that any of the shit they were doing did anything. Okay? There's none. So what are you talking about? You have evidence that people are doing things. It's not evidence that it's actually anything other than that. Do you believe when people are talking in unknown tongues and when they're picking up snakes off of floors and holding them up and doing all that in those Pentecostal revivalist tent meetings? Do you believe that that's actually coming from a mysterious source, or do you think it's more likely a psychological aspect of a group doing their thing together? Kind of like the way you get carried away at your favorite concert when you're out there doing something you wouldn't normally do, where you're waving your hands up in the air and you're shouting and screaming and doing that kind of thing. It's the power of group suggestion. And unless you can demonstrate that it's not, I don't have any reason to believe it's anything but those things. If you're going to claim extraordinary things behind this, then you have to have something that is convincing. Otherwise, I could just say you're making this shit up like I believe you're doing. And let's see. I think that was about all I printed for this one. It's yeah, because it just goes on with more shit about devotion and more shit about how it all works. And he even has a funny little thing about if you rely on it too much, it might just be the voice in your head. Now, let me ask you a question. If I run into somebody who's an end of the world prophet on the streets with a cardboard sign and he's screaming about the end of time, and I run into Bill W. and he's talking his bullshit, how would I make the determination which one of those is right and which one of those is telling the truth? I mean, they saying it's true. Is that how I'm going to determine what is true or what is false, by just them saying it? Because right now, if I played dumb and I said, I don't know the difference between what Bill W. wrote here that I printed off for this video and what the guy out there with the cardboard sign under a bridge on a street corner somewhere was screaming about, apocalyptic visions and UFOs. How am I going to make the determination who's telling the truth? How am I going to make the determination which one is right? How am I going to make which determination of which is the true voice of beyond? Wouldn't I need some kind of substantial evidence for this? And Bill W. calls us closed-minded for asking that one simple thing. Where's your proof of any of this shit? He's just making it all up, but that was actually not the overall point I wanted to go for in this video. What I wanted to go for is that claim, the claim that anything could be your higher power, including the group. Bill W. himself in the 12 and 12 says you can't do that. In fact, in 2 or 3 places in the 12 and 12, he goes off on people who call the group their higher power or who have any God they want. He tells you very clearly what God is, what God wants, and what it wants you to do. And yeah, I got plenty more evidence to prove that. But I think I've talked long enough for this video. And yeah, hate I missed you guys last week, but see you in a week, hopefully next week, and chime in on the comments. Let me know what you think and share some of your experiences with me. See you guys next week.